door. There was no implementation phase. There was no opportunity for the educational process that is required in this. That is the inequity in that, and that is the unfairness of that policy. And that's why I'm suggesting to you that if we had provided and said, let's do a phase, here are the healthy choices you must provide. They have to be on your menu. What else you put there is up to you. But in the next 5 years, this will be your menu. I think would have allowed that to been phased in much easier, would have allowed, quite frankly, those private operators who are looking after canteens, and they're not conglomerates, they're community people who are turning around with every cent they make over and above what they do to cover their costs and pouring it back into those existing schools. Would have allowed them to adopt this policy and allow it to be phased in without the pain that the schools are suffering now. So I would encourage you to have a look at that. You don't need to respond, but I would encourage you to have a look at that and see where we could go with that. And I will again add, in the best interest of the student body of not only my constituency, but across Nova Scotia where they are having some of those issues. You had mentioned in your earlier, in your opening remarks around the healthy active learning and living policy that you have. I wonder if you could explain that to me.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member, you didn't ask for a response to your last question, but I want to make a comment if I could. The draft policy on foods was out in the schools during the past year. It was circulated to teachers and school advisory councils and principals and so on for their reaction. And so I think there was a bit of forewarning that something was coming. And people did submit some responses and reactions, and it was modified in some ways. It will be going back out in September of this year when schools start up again, and we will be looking for the beginning of the implementation in January of 2007. So it may not be, the gradual implementation may not be as you've defined and designed it, but it certainly was out there for input. The word was out that this was what the policy was going to look like, and the implementation will begin in January of 2007. The real question with respect to healthy, active learning and lifestyle and policy, it's a combination of things, but one of them is that healthy foods policy. It's also encouraging more physical activity, and in the election, the Premier made a commitment to hiring additional phys ed teachers in our schools, to making physical education a compulsory course at high school. And so there are a number of activities that we're looking at that will try to address the concern about inactivity and encourage students to become more active and to become healthier.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What are the initiatives that are going to encourage more activity in schools? You made reference to the phys ed credit at the senior high level. I'm wondering, is that it, or is there something else coming?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, this begins at elementary, and it's a period of compulsory physical activity for students at 20 minutes a day of physical education, grades primary 1 and 2, 25 to 35 minutes for grades 3 to 6, and grades 7 to 9, 30 minutes of instruction per day. This is all part of making that physical activity a component and a requirement of the curriculum. And then the elective course, which would not be elective now at the high school level, is the physical education.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
What is the implementation dates of that? Is it this year, or is it 3 years from now? Or
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chair, to the member. In this current budget, we have allocated money. We will phase it in gradually, but we have put in money to hire 10 phys ed teachers. We have to look in particular at the high school for their programming concerns and the facilities that they need in order to deliver that and how they can schedule that. So it will be gradual, but that first commitment of $500,000 has already been made, and that's to be earmarked for physical education instructors, teachers.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you said 500,000 for 10 new phys ed. Five for 10. So when will the implementation happen at the elementary level? I find it rather interesting that we've put through a food policy that, in my view, would, well, in my riding, will actually close cafeterias if there's not something that doesn't change it. To deal with 5 of the 21 meals that a child would eat, and quite frankly, in most cases in my riding, to deal with 1, because most of them would eat at school, buy a lunch at school 1 day a week. And the very thing that I think we could be doing in terms of improving the health of our students, their ability to learn, is in the activity component of your program, which, as if I heard you correctly, will be phased in, and the 10 will be dealing with the senior high. So we really don't have a drop-dead date of when that'll start taking place at the elementary level. I think if we're actually truly concerned about the health of our children in school, then that should be where we should be starting, is at the elementary level, not at the senior high level. Quite frankly, many of those kids have already developed their physical activity patterns. We're now allowing another generation to move through the system before we start getting to the point of developing this at an early age. So I'm wondering if you have any idea when we may begin to see the implementation at the elementary level.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, to the member, and I'm just reading this here, but we have invested $520,000 new funding for 05-06, which is to hire additional phys ed teachers for the grades 3 to 6. So that in 05-06, that was a commitment, and an additional 560 is to be used in 06-07 for 10 additional phys ed teachers. So elementary grades 3 to 6 would have been monies in the 05-06 budget, and the 500,000 06-07 is for 10 additional phys ed teachers.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that is to implement this program, province-wide program. We're going to hire 10 teachers. So that's less than, well, it's almost, it's about a half of one per county, I guess, if you went across using the counties at 18 counties. How's that going to work?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chair, if I could, this is in addition to the staff that we currently have. So we have phys ed teachers who are already employed in our schools. This is in addition. We're looking at a total of 60 new positions. We're beginning to phase them in. And so it's not that 10 teachers are going to have to take on the responsibility for implementing all of the phys ed programs, but it's to build on the staff that we currently have. And it is phased in, and the total number that we're targeting that we believe we need in order to provide that service and that support is 60 staff positions.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
So the phys ed teachers that you currently have in the system, use Annapolis County, who are not full-time phys ed teachers, who cover other curriculum aspects, I assume you'll be hiring more teachers to replace the role that they're doing, and they will become full-time phys ed teachers to implement this policy?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chair, if I could, the allocation of funding is to the boards, and the boards are responsible for doing their staffing, but we have an expectation that that is what will be delivered. If they decide to take somebody who's 0.5 phys ed and make them full-time phys ed, that's a board-based decision, but the expectation is that the students will receive that allocation of phys ed or physically active time in their daily instructional time.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Board responsibility to allocate the time, to implement your policy, right? I assume this is a new policy. You wouldn't be suggesting that you would be implementing a policy and saying to school boards, here's a fraction of what you may require to provide this policy, to implement this program, but you're going to do it anyway, and it's going to be your responsibility to find it somewhere in your system to make it happen. How can that happen without other things suffering? There's only so much money the school board has. This is a new policy. How are they going to implement it without the proper funding?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member, this initiative is not done in isolation. It's done in consultation with school boards. The school boards know that they will get additional funding. They know what the department is expecting that they will do with that funding, and they know that at the end of the implementation period, we're looking at approximately 60 FTEs in order to deliver that. And so it's in consultation with them, but they do know our expectation.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the Minister. I look forward to going to the elementary schools in my constituency in the fall and seeing physical activity happening in every one of them. It will be a welcome sight, and I will congratulate you if that happens. It's something that I think we've been, on a personal note, I believe is long overdue. We can spend all the time we like talking about the Healthy Food Initiative. If you are truly concerned about the health and well-being of the children, there's nothing better you can do for them than to implement this program. But you need to be prepared to fund it. And I'll be looking forward to attending those schools, to ensuring that they have the same access to physical activity as every other child does in Nova Scotia. So I welcome that. One of the other issues that I want to touch on is the tuition support program, which you also mentioned in your opening, and that you had extended it to 3 years from a 2-year program. I'm wondering, do you see that program being extended beyond that 3-year period?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member, I think if you recall my earlier comments, we recognize that there are sometimes situations where the needs cannot be met in the school, and that we are very much in support of the tuition support program, and we have extended that to the 3rd year. And what our intent is to consult with the parents and those people who are providing the support during that 3rd year to determine what the needs still may be at that time, and to look at ways that we might be able to provide support. We have not yet said how that's going to happen, but we have said that we will do that during that 3rd year, because we do not want students who come to the end of that and are not able to be re-entered back into the public school system. So that consultation with parents and with the educators providing that support will take place during that 3rd year.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Sure. So will the consultation be with the parents on how their child is doing, how the child is doing in this program, or will the consultation be on how you are going to integrate that child back into the public education system?
The Honourable Minister of Health. Education, pardon me. Many hours of that, yes.
Mr. Chairman, to the member opposite, whenever there are decisions made that are in the best interest of students, we want to and we encourage parental participation in those decisions. And so we would be sitting down with the parents, not to have the parents tell us what the academic successes have been. That's where the educators who've been delivering that those supports to the parents or to the students would be part of the consultation. But the parents would certainly be there because they are the people with a vested interest here.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Mr. Chair, so if you're the educational providers and experts, I think you called them, say to you that this child is not able to be integrated back into the public education system, are you prepared to fund that child or any number of children for 4 years?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That decision would be part of the discussion and consultation at that time as to what is the next best step for that child.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
And I take it from that answer that you're saying that's a possibility. That will be one of the options that will be on the table as we assess all the information that's provided around those children.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
The answer to the question is that when students are pulled out for that tuition support program, the ultimate goal is that they do re-enter public schools. And so we will all be working towards that. However, if during the third year there seem to be issues or concerns as to whether that would be in the best interest of students, then those will be discussed in those consultations with parents and the educators.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Thank you for that, Minister. In your opening, you also mentioned about get the right number, 321 new seats at the NSCC that you were, I assume, claiming credit. And I'm just wondering, what is the relationship between you and the NSCC?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The community colleges do fall under my jurisdiction as Department of Education, and we do fund their programs.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
I guess what I would say to you around the 321 new seats, are they actually new seats? And your government, and I'll say your government because this $123 million centralization of the NSCC that took place removed 150 seats out of the constituency that I represent. I have two community colleges in my riding, the College of Geographic Sciences, which is known around the world, and students come from all over the world to attend that college. And I have the Annapolis campus of the NSCC. And 150 of those students and those programs and those seats were moved to Kentville, where they added on to, let me just so you're clear, so they added more bricks and mortar to a community college in Kentville while they were pulling the seats out of Annapolis. That's why I call it a $123 million centralization of the NSCC. And if you're claiming credit for the 321 seats, I assume you're also taking credit for the 150 lost seats in the riding of Annapolis. And are they new 321 seats, or are they just pulled in from everywhere else?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the member opposite. Our plan is to look at 2,500 new seats implemented over a period of time to help meet the needs that the community college staff and administration do identify, and the location of those seats and where they deliver their particular programs are the responsibility of the community college. But overall, it's looking at 2,500 new seats, and the location of those is determined by the community college.
Order, the time has expired for the member. The Chair now recognizes the Honourable Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to revisit in my last question. I asked through the chair. I asked the minister what specific initiatives or strategies that the Department of Education was going to implement to address the imbalance or the inequities or the inequalities respecting black learners. And I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the response that I heard was that education in Nova Scotia from P to 12 is designed for all students, and an amendment to that is that they had special needs programs. Is that correct, Madam Minister?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Chair, to the member opposite, we have committed $4.1 million over the next 4 years to address and implement some of the recommendations in the Black Report. And the member would be well aware, the African Canadian Education, the CASE advisory group meets with the minister regularly, and we would be looking for their input and advice and support before we proceed with a lot of changes in our public school program. But I did want to highlight for you something that is really, we believe, positive, in that we are taking some steps initially in those 5 schools in this school year to help close that gap and perhaps address the inequities.
Honourable Member of Waverley, Fall River, Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I want to reiterate that for 500 years now, we've identified that something is wrong with the public school system in Nova Scotia for Black learners. And the Black Report has been out now for several years. CASE has been around now for a number of years. So again, I asked the minister if the minister could be more specific with what those strategies are that are going to be implemented.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chair, to the member opposite, the recommendations in the Black Report, we have a progress report on where we are with the implementation of those, and I can also provide for the member opposite a list of the initiatives that the CASE Advisory Group has submitted for our consideration and implementation. But I think the progress report on the recommendations in the Black Report are clear evidence that this government has taken positive steps to implement those and to address the concerns that exist with the disadvantaged students.
Honourable Member of Waverley, Fall River, Beaverbank.
I guess my comment is that we've identified the system is broken and still remains broken today, and I don't think I'm going to go any further on that point. Mr. Chair, over the course of the last number of years, one of the catchwords that I've been hearing, and I certainly heard it in the tone of the speech, and I hear, Mr. Chair, the word of diversity being thrown around quite frequently. And I've also heard some discussion here today related to special needs, students with disabilities. It's been recognized, although certainly in the community that I come from, bullying and name-calling in the public school system has long been recognized as an issue and a concern from where I come from. One of the problems that I see in the public school system is we take action. We implement a strategy, and the strategy would be, well, this is the rule that we have, whether it be zero tolerance or whatever the case may be, that we won't tolerate bullying and name-calling, but it could end up in an automatic suspension regardless of what. My question to the minister, through the chair, is what strategies does the Department of Education have in place, if any, to make diversity a larger part of the education of all Nova Scotians? And I think when I talk about education, I'm not talking about just the students, but I'm talking about administration and educators.
Honourable Minister of Education.
Right. Mr. Chairman, to the member opposite, the whole issue of diversity and the Department of Education and the province of Nova Scotia trying to meet the needs of all of our learners is a challenge. And we continue to work with those people who can best advise us on strategies that we should look at and implement in order to help meet those needs. And in particular, in this particular situation, I've identified the advisory group that does sit with me, and we respond and respect the initiatives and the concerns that they put forward and the suggestions as to how we might overcome the diversity issue that exists.
Honourable Member Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm feeling somewhat at a loss here because I feel like I've got to ask the question again, and what I'm requesting from the Department of Education through the Minister and through you, Mr. Chair, is again, what specifically is on the table or is coming down the tubes to address the diversity issues in the public school systems of Nova Scotia?
Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chair, to the member opposite. As a department and also at the board level, we recognize the need to have qualified teachers in our schools who can be and will be role models and who will help boards address the diversity issue and concern. And although the hirings of staff is the responsibility of the board, we are working with encouraging through training and through scholarships to have African Nova Scotian students who are interested in becoming teachers to have the opportunities to get educated and trained, and encourage the boards when those qualified people are available to do the hiring. And we believe that's one step that can help address the diversity issue and support our African Nova Scotian students.
Honourable Member Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Well, I heard a response, Mr. Chair. For me, the question still remains unanswered. And I think I've asked it twice, so I don't know if there's any point in asking it a third time, and I say that not to be disrespectful. I got to make a comment, because when we talk about the hiring of African Canadian educators, my question was around the issue of diversity itself. And diversity just doesn't pertain to one particular segment of the population. Diversity is about all of us, and it's all inclusive. But I do appreciate the response, and I guess it's somewhat refreshing, although it's not the solution. It may be a small part of the solution, but it's certainly not the solution. And if we've got a public education system that's broken and it's not addressing the needs of black learners, then another question would arise where the educator is going to come from when you're hiring black educators. So that's certainly a question for another day, but something we should think about, because I've got to reiterate here, we've already determined that the wheel is broken. I mean, there's no argument there. What I wanted to hear today were some of those remedies, and so the questions I'm asking are about what are those remedies, and thus far I haven't heard them. I want to go on to the curriculum, and certainly one of the problems in the public school system in Nova Scotia is one of inclusiveness when it comes to the public school system in the curriculum, because I know certainly if I open up a textbook, I don't think it does justice to the Mi'kmaq population of Nova Scotia, or indeed First Nations in Canada, and I certainly know it doesn't do justice to persons of African descent. So my next question would be to the minister, through you, Mr. Chair, is there a strategy, or will there be a strategy to address some of the curriculum imbalances and lacking pages?
Honorable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member, from the curriculum department, we are currently in the process of developing 2 new courses. One is a grade 8 course, a Mi'kmaq course, and the second one is grade 12. It's English African Canadian Studies. So those 2 are being developed as we speak, and they are the beginning of addressing, I believe, the concern that's been raised.
Honorable Member, Waverly Fall River, Beaverbank.
Yeah, those courses, Mr. Chair, my question to the minister would be, are those courses mandatory courses? Will they be by choice? Could she elaborate more about those courses, and if students have an option either to take or not to take? I'd hate to see those courses just spurred up in schools where there's a predominantly Mi'kmaq population or a predominantly African Nova Scotia population.
Honorable Minister of Education.
If I could, Mr. Chair, to the Speaker, the grade 12 course, the English African Canadian Studies, will be a mandatory course. It can count as a mandatory course if students wish to use it as one of their total number of credits. And the grade 8, there's no course selection at grade 8, but the grade 12 one is an option.
Honorable Member, Waverly Fall River, Beaverbank.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I'd like to turn the floor over to my colleague.
Okay. Honorable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this point, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the Minister for focusing in on all our questions during the supply debate, and to congratulate her on taking this ministerial position. It is a challenging one, but it is also an important one to the future of this province's success. First part of my questions, I just want to basically run a scenario by you. Situation that's taking place in my constituency right now. I have 2 feeder elementary schools that feed into a junior high by the name of John Martin. An elementary school, Harborview Elementary and John McNeil Elementary both feed into the John Martin Junior High. The situation that we have here is that I have parents that are approaching me from the John McNeil School that have told me that they're in fear of their children going on to the junior high level, in particular to the John Martin School. This is due to the fact that some of the, quote, tougher children come out of the Harborview School area. And my first question to the minister is, in this situation, what kind of answers can I take back to my community and to those parents who are in fear of their children going to this school to deal with these bullies?
Honorable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member opposite, I guess perhaps in a question, is this the first time that these 2 feeder schools have fed into this junior high? If it is not, then I would expect that if there are concerns that parents have, that they would be based on some history. And if they are concerns, that they would be meeting with their board staff, principals, administration to make that transition easy and safe. But it would certainly should be addressed at the board level.
Honorable Member, Dartmouth North.
I want to reiterate a point that was made this afternoon by my honorable colleague from Timberley Prospect. He had spoke earlier about the number of suspensions throughout the province in the schools, and some of the highest numbers come out of the Dartmouth North area, Dartmouth High School in particular, which has its feeder schools that come out of Harborview, John Martin, John McNeil, and Bicentennial. One of the things that was mentioned was setting up a tracking system for the province to centralize this and to come up with some sort of statistic that will allow the school board to, or the education department to monitor the amount of suspensions. My question would be to the minister, through you, Mr. Chair, would be what kind of information from those stats would we be able to take, or the ministry be able to take in setting up some sort of programs that they might be able to implement to deal with bullying situations or violence? Would they actually be able to use those numbers, or are they planning on using those numbers in that way?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member, obviously the intent of any initiative like that is to try to identify and respond to and reduce, if they do exist, patterns of behavior that are inappropriate. And so we would be monitoring that very carefully, and if that pattern develops, then there would be supports that would be put in place to help those students with inappropriate behavior change that behavior.
The Honourable Member of Dartmouth North.
I can only say that a lot of it is it's pretty much a social situation, and I think hopefully not just in Dartmouth North that these problems have arisen and will be addressed. I want to move on to a situation with a constituent, April Leahy, who I was approached by during the election, and again had the opportunity to meet with her several nights ago. April is a university student. She has a Bachelor of Arts at Dalhousie in 2 different departments. In the Classics Department, Linguistics and Ancient History, and SOSA Department, which is Sociology, Social Anthropology. She's a young lady whose mother has taken it upon herself to mortgage her home 3 times to be able to afford tuition. Last year, April had visited the area of Europe, went to York University in England, which was also financed by her mother. And from the York University, she received 9 credits to her master's, to go towards her master's degree. The question that April proposed to me is the fact that she's unable to get financing to further her education to enable her to get this master's degree right now. She's shown initiative. She's trying to work part-time hours, being a full-time student. Her mother's taken upon herself to mortgage her home. She is a single mother who works full-time as well. And she's frustrated that she's been told that she cannot continue with any further funding due to the amount of funding that she's already received. My question in regards to this is, what is the Department of Student Loans policy on student loan accessibility for post-secondary or postgraduate degrees?
Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member, the short answer to the question is they are eligible. But the bigger question, and something I would want to review with you, would be the specifics of that case, because if there's a file there, I'd like to review it, and perhaps we could discuss that further. But the short answer is she should be eligible.
Honourable Member of Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Madam Minister. I will definitely take you up on that offer and would like to revisit it. I do want to make one more point that is of query to both parties, myself and April Leahy. In this case, we had approached the student loans program the last couple days, and she was told that she can indeed receive funding only if she becomes a part-time student and finishes her degree over 2 years, which she had a problem with understanding, because why wouldn't they allow her to finish it in a 1-year course? If she does indeed do it part-time, she will end up having to pay a registration fee next year, which will end up costing more money. So she's inquiring about that as well. The other thing, of course, is if she's a full-time student, it also enables her to keep her university pass, which for a young student is very important. So I look forward to visiting those, or this case with you. I'll move on to, of course, a recent topic throughout the sitting of the House and the election has been talk about the closures of schools. And in regards to that, I want to say that in the particular area of Dartmouth North, our greatest concern is updating our schools, not necessarily closures. We've dealt with some of those in the past. But I have a high school, Dartmouth High, which is a very traditional school. Have a lot of successful graduates come out of Dartmouth High. And I had an opportunity before the election to go in and take a tour that I was requested by some of the students on student council. I've done work with a teacher by the name of Mr. McCormick through the co-op program, filtering students into the community for jobs. There's a major concern here with this school and the comfort level that the students go there. They have a problem with the suspensions and violence in the school, but more so the biggest concern for this student council, the students that go there and some of the teachers, is the amount of funding to update the school. And I'm just wondering if now or in the near future the Honourable Minister can enlighten me as to potential spendings in the area of Dartmouth North to refurbish this school and bring it up to code. There's poor air condition qualities, there's bathroom stall doors missing, the school is in dire need of paint. And I must tell you that they are definitely interested in furthering their education, but in a more comfortable way. And if you could enlighten me as to when potential funding might come in that direction, I'd appreciate it.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, to the member. As I've spoken to earlier, boards do submit their list of priorities to the department, the priorities for upgrading, additions, renovations, or new school construction. It's my understanding that that particular school is on that list that came in from the board. And so now our capital construction committee will be looking at those from all across the boards and identifying priorities. But the first hurdle has been reached in that it is on the list that your board did send in. And once the capital construction committee has completed their work, then they'll be in contact with the boards as to the status of those projects.
Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Before I pass the rest of my time off to my honourable colleague from Dartmouth East, I want to make a comment as to some of the things that were discussed here today in and around elementary school age children, potential of guidance counselors. My honourable colleague from Timberley Prospect had made mention of the importance of junior high school age development. I just want to say how important, when we look at the health issues that we're dealing with today, a lot of the talk is around preventative medicine. And I look at the education department as having a responsibility to those school-age children, and as far as building a community and building families. We allow our children to go to school and we entrust them to the hands of our teachers. And if we don't give our teachers the right tools and the right mechanisms, our children kind of fall by the wayside. And I have to say that a lot of the issues that we deal with in Dartmouth North are social issues. There's a lot of evidence of mental illness and mental questions that young students come upon. And I just think that it's important that we consider putting guidance counselors at the earliest levels of the education system as possible. It's better to deal with it at that stage, to raise our children the right way, and we don't have that problem. And I'll go back to the Harborview John McNeil situation. I look at that situation and say, if we have a guidance counselor that can deal with those issues, those anger issues that some of those children are facing, we no longer need a police presence that is currently in our junior high at John Martin. We want our children to be comfortable, and you take them and go to John Martin and they're uncomfortable, and then they go to the high school level, and the ability to learn in comfort is just not there. So I just want to reiterate some of the points that were made today to impress upon the department and the minister that it's crucial that, again, we attack it like the health issue. Preventative. Started early, started often. We spoke about physical education. Started at the elementary age. It's crucial. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Dartmouth East. Dartmouth South East. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just before I start my questioning, I wonder if I could make an introduction.
Yes.
Thank you. In the West Gallery, we have visiting us this evening Sandra Whitehead and Renee Quigley from the Bakery, Confectionery, Tobacco Workers, and Grain Millers Union, and we're very pleased to have them with us. And I ask everyone to join me. Mr. Chair, the one area I want to talk about this evening is the critical gap in programming and services for young adults with disabilities. And certainly there's always been an undersupply of community-based programming for individuals with disabilities when they leave the public school program. And this issue has really been brought to a head lately by the new trend among regional school boards to actually, as some people put it, push out youth with disabilities much earlier in their school career than they had in the past. And I'm just wondering if, through you to the minister, we could ask the ministers to respond to the issue that's come to light with the Halifax Regional School Board. I'm not sure how widespread that new interpretation of responsibilities to youth in the province are among the regional school boards. And I'd just be interested to start off my questioning to get some reaction from the department on how they view that situation.
Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to my member opposite. I think this question, one similar to it, was raised in question period. I have received correspondence specific to some students who are in that unfortunate situation. And I say unfortunate because these students have special needs. They have, under the Education Act, a right to be in our schools until age 21. If they have completed the outcomes expected for them at the public schools, then there is a gap, and let's say that happens when they are 18 or 19. They're not eligible to go into some of our community services programs until they're age 21, and we do not want those students falling through the cracks. I believe that the situation that you're speaking about and the ones I've heard about appear to be specific to Halifax Regional School Board. I know the board that I'm most familiar with does have programs in place for students in that age range or in that gap, and so I would certainly be working with the Halifax board to look at what programs might be in place or should be in place. Also working with community services, and my colleague and I have talked about that, because if there needs to be some adjustment on one end or the other so that those students are eligible to be involved in a particular program, whether it's through education or community services, we want to make sure that we address that. So, as I said, I believe at this point it is specific to Halifax Regional, or perhaps more prominent in Halifax Regional, but all across the province, we would want to treat all students the same. So that's the progress report to date.
Honourable Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the minister's offer to follow up on this issue. I think it's a very dangerous and slippery slope because certainly reports and studies in Nova Scotia indicate that persons with disabilities seem to have a lower rate of participation in the workforce as it is. And they also tend to have lower levels of educational achievement. And I would be very nervous about seeing school boards not recognizing that they have a responsibility to allow students with disabilities to reinforce their learning, to continue with their life skills, and be as ready as possible to be productive and to have a life of independence when they actually graduate from the public school system. I know from my own experience that many students in Nova Scotia continued beyond graduation. They went back and they took other programs and courses to get higher marks, or to perhaps they weren't eligible for community college or university, so they had to go back and take other programs. And I can see a problem here that if students have graduated and yet they need to continue with the public school program to get necessary credits or to be better prepared to enter into post-secondary education, that it would be very important for them to be able to stay within the school system until the age of 21. So I guess I want to ask a couple questions. If the minister hasn't been in touch with the Halifax Regional School Board, has anyone in the department followed up on the information that came to light, I think, through the media? And if so, what concrete steps will the minister and her department be taking besides meeting to make sure that the students currently enrolled are not prematurely pushed out of the public school program, at least in the metro area, if that's the only region where this is happening?
Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the member opposite. The answer is yes. We have been talking with and working with the Halifax Board. June 27th, actually, a meeting took place, and there was a commitment at that time that the parties would work together to bring a resolution to the specific situation that they were discussing at that time. And that was, there was an understanding from the board that there would be something ready for September of this school year. The second thing, though, that we're continuing to work on is that's the short-term solution, but we also have to look at the long-term solution, and again, working with community services to see if we can bridge that gap. But the short answer is yes, the meetings have begun, the communication has started, and at the meeting on June 27th, there was an agreement and an understanding that all parties would work toward a solution for September.
Honourable Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's encouraging to hear that, and I'm just wondering if the minister would state on the floor that any student who has been prematurely or family prematurely told that they are not eligible to return to the school system, if that will be retroactive and that they can continue on with their individual program plans, their IPPs this fall.
Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my response to that would be we would be looking at them on an individual basis. I think that's to respect confidentiality and to look at each individual needs. We would want to assess them on an individual basis.
Honourable Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reinforce what the minister has said, that there's also that huge gap in community-based programming and opportunities for sort of pre-employment transitional programs, and also skill development for youth with disabilities. As she's already mentioned, many of the programs offered through the Department of Community Services begin at age 21, and so there's a huge gap there between those youth who are 18 years of age and 21. And in addition, And I realize that there's a shared responsibility here. I'm not talking just about the Department of Education, but the wait lists for youth with disabilities trying to get into the Department of Community Services programs is quite long. And so we have a significant number of young Nova Scotians who are losing their knowledge, their motivation, their sense of independence in that age group because they're waiting too long to get into productive training and transitional programs. I'm concerned, Mr. Chair, that some of the action and interpretation taken by the Halifax Regional School Board is the result of shortage of funds. And I'd like to hear from the Minister to what extent the new funding formula and the recommended increases in funding through the Hogg report will be in effect this year through this budget.
Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the member opposite. Our funding per pupil stays with the student and goes to the board as long as that student is enrolled in a program with the board. So if those particular students were back there at age 19 and again at age 20 and again at age 21, if they were in a public school program within the Halifax board, our funding continues, the per student funding continues as long as they are there. So having them back, call them a returning grad or whatever you want to call them, as long as they are there, they're in the count for the funding. So that would answer, I believe, the question about the funding. Second question was with the distribution of funds to the boards, and the $5 million out of the one of the recommendations in the Hogg report. That is part of our budget for this year, and that allocation has been included in our numbers.
Honourable Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm assuming, though, that the original funding for students with special needs was not adequate enough according to the programming offered by the Halifax Regional School Board, because it's my understanding that a significant amount of the supplementary funding also went to those programs and to assist those students. So I'm sure that any increase that came to the board through the Hogg report recommendations would certainly make it much easier for the board to provide as positive a learning experience for the students with special needs as possible. I just want to quickly go over to another area of interest, and I'm just wondering, this is a follow-up question from last year's estimate debates in terms of the amount of money being raised by schools across the province in terms of their school fundraising. And I was very reassured to hear earlier today that schools will not have to or will not be allowed to raise funding for students in order for that money to go to their mandatory program, their public school program. But there's still a significant amount, and I had estimated about a year and a half ago, and the Deputy Minister did agree that I was probably in the right range, that $50 million was being raised by schools throughout this province in order to provide necessary funding for school programs as well as the extracurricular activities that are required. And I understood that after that, the department had done a survey among superintendents across Nova Scotia, and I'm just curious if the actual figure for fundraising totals was ever derived from that survey of the superintendents.
Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member, my staff are giving me some information here, but I don't think there's any dispute that it's a significant amount of dollars that's raised. But what we're prepared to do is to get the detail. The boards have been asked to report for the 05-06 year. And so once we have that information available, we can share that. But we don't have it at our fingertips right now. But that has been reported and it is available.
Honourable Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just before I pass over my time to, I believe, my colleague from Hants East, I just want to remind the minister why that information is so significant. And when I chaired a school board many, many years ago, I became very aware within my own district that of the significant amount of money that was raised by the schools through the home and school associations. And it raised questions in my mind at the time that, you know, we like to provide as equal an opportunity to a positive learning situation as possible, and that there should be some way to rationalize the funding for programs across the system so that one neighborhood school was not penalized because there might be a higher economic situation there, and that parents would have more ability to raise money to supplement what was happening in the school. And that was never resolved at the time, and I think the situation, the problem has grown through the years. I know Newfoundland has done a study looking at the impact of unnecessary fundraising on lower economic level communities and students, and it really, really does interfere with the quality of education that they get. So I would like to recommend to the minister that that we either do our own study on the impact of fundraising in our schools across the province, or that we take the lessons learned from the Newfoundland and Labrador situation and apply them to our school boards across the province, so that we can learn from another province and be able to better provide quality education in Nova Scotia. It does cause a lot of inequalities, and the problem is just getting worse. And certainly, one of the best ways to intervene and turn around some of our desperate poverty cycles in Nova Scotia is to allow the highest quality and highest level of education possible for children in lower economic, socioeconomic family situations. So I'd be curious to know if the department, through the minister, through you, Mr. Chair, to the minister, would consider looking at the implications of the degree of fundraising that is taking place in Nova Scotia in our schools. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to my member opposite. Socioeconomic levels in communities certainly has an impact on the ability for fundraising to be effective, and it does create an imbalance. There's no question. From the department's perspective, we want to be able to provide adequate funding to deliver programs on an equitable basis. However, we've made a start, I think, by collecting the data so we know what is happening out there, and we will know whether that 50 million is a real number or not. And that is a good beginning, because that will allow us, and I'll make a commitment that we will follow up on that to see what the implications of that may be, what the real issues are, what the history, and we're just starting our history, but what that shows us, and commission a review of that.
The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the minister and their staff for an opportunity to ask some questions. And I think that because of the minister's former life with the Chinecto Central Regional School Board, I know that you won't need to depend on your deputy or staff to answer any of these questions. So I really appreciate that. So they can leave. I want to start with an issue, and I'm basically going by constituency-driven questions to me, and so the first one is around the use of a small bus for the transportation of challenged students. I'm not sure if all mentally challenged or some physically challenged or whatever. I suspect probably both. But certainly I know in the case of McIsaac Ettinger in Milford, Kaisi is a Down syndrome child, and he travels on this bus. And the beauty, I guess, for the family in this is that the bus is actually able to back in the driveway. It's one of the smaller school buses, and the board, I think, is looking at replacing that bus, but they're replacing it with a larger bus. And it's not. I've spoken to the supervisor for the Nova District of Schools, and she seemed to indicate that it was a question of it was a larger load, required a larger bus, but that wasn't what I found by talking to the bus driver. So, but it seems that the board is going to move to a larger bus, which is not, I guess, as serviceable certainly for this young little client, and I'm just wondering if the minister could speak to that. What the family would like is certainly, if the bus is going to be replace it with another small bus. So as far as policy on that from the department level, and particularly I know there's probably some leeway that the boards are allowed some flexibility, but I just wonder if you might be able to address or enlighten me on what you know about that transportation issue.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chair, to member opposite, thank you for the question. And the specifics of that, I can certainly talk to you outside the House on that. But I do know that transportation is responsibility of the boards. And if there are concerns, safety concerns with respect to the vehicle and the transportation of that student, I'd like to sit down and talk with you a little bit about that, but it is board's responsibility to provide transportation. I'm sure you're aware of that. But if the mode of transportation is something that is deemed to be unsafe, there may be other means to transport that child.
The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, and I thank the minister for her answer. Yeah, I think we all would be aware that we have large school buses every day who stop on the roads and they flash their light and put out their sign, and we know that all that is done in the interest of safety for students, and I think that for this young gentleman and for the family, I think it was the ability for that bus actually to back in the driveway off the road, and just made it easier for loading him. They weren't holding up traffic. They live just as if you come around a turn in the road, and it seemed to work very well for them. But I'd be glad to discuss this with you outside of estimates. Can you tell me what the accreditation process is, if I have the right term?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member opposite, you're talking about the school accreditation process. 2 years ago, the department began a pilot where they were looking at individual schools and looking at planning for improvements within each school. And it's been called the accreditation process, and it's not to be confused with the accreditation process that we have in hospitals, where hospitals are measured against a standard. This measurement is against the results at the school at any point in time. For example, there is a team that would look at all of the literacy and standardized assessment scores that exist in the school. They would look at parental involvement in the school. They would look at disciplinary measures in the school, suspensions, those kinds of things. They take a snapshot of the school as it now exists. And that's part of the review. And that's done in consultation with parents. There is a review committee that's put together, and parents sit on that, whether it's school advisory council, parent-teacher group, the school administration sits on that, and a teacher representative. And someone from outside the school comes in to facilitate that, and that person is called an external facilitator. So they sit down and they collect the data, and they do a report which looks at the conditions in the school, the academic results of the school, the climate of the school, all those things at that point in time. And then the onus on the team is to develop, in consultation with teachers and community, an improvement plan that will move them from that point to where they would like to be. And there is a period, once that school improvement plan is developed, it is evaluated and assessed by an external team that is completely foreign to even the school board. It would be principals or teachers from some other board across the province, and they would come in and they would look at the data and they would determine if the goals that were set in the school improvement plan really addressed the evidence and the data that was there. For example, if your reading scores, your literacy scores are low, then the goals that are set in the school improvement plan should address that, and the strategies and objectives should help move the school forward with that particular goal. So there's a 3-year period that's set aside for the school. Once their improvement plan, their school improvement plan is approved, then they have 3 years and provincial money to support them working through that improvement plan to achieve those goals. At the end of that period, the same kind of an assessment takes place, and they look at where they were and where they are now, and have they been successful, and if they have been successful, then they are deemed to be accredited.
The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate that, and I raise it, I think, as much in terms of the Ames report, which usually has Hants North at the bottom, and not that I'm saying I'm a big supporter of the Ames report. I'm not struck on their criteria. So, but anyway, I think for some level of comfort, I think for the community there, whose children go there, I think that this process, I think they would see as useful in setting their goals and trying to bring that school to a level that they would really appreciate. So I look forward to see how that moves on for the schools in my area. I want to take a couple of minutes to address some issues. I met with a committee at Hants North, actually, and I can't think of the gentleman who was from the Chignector Central School Board who offered information, but we did a little tour of the school and we looked at the windows, and it was all around, as far as I could tell, around the physical upgrades to the building, and I have here a letter that went into my local weekly press, and I can table it if the committee requires, but it talks in terms of Hants East Rural High. It talks about Hants East was originally built in 1957 with additions in 68 and 75. A capital project submission report dated October 2000 indicated that Hants East HERH required significant upgrades and replacements to components such as roof, windows, doors, heating, plumbing, electrical, and ventilation, estimated to be in the vicinity of $4.9 million. It seems to me that the board allocates, if that report is as it's indicated here, which I don't know that, I'm just going by what's in the paper. My understanding is that the board allocates $1 million, I think, in a year to such upgrades, and I'm thinking that's not just going to be in Hants East. But so I'm curious about a board's ability to address some of these issues for what appears to me to be a small sum in comparison to the need. And so between your experience with the board and certainly now as your experience as minister, I'm just wondering what avenues are available to schools in terms of funding. My impression of this government is it hasn't been overly generous. So if you can let me know your thoughts in terms of what looks to be a significant need in one school compared to the dollars available across the whole board to address these issues in schools.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the member opposite. When we look at the needs for upgrading, renovations, additions, and so on, it would be staff from the board that would go out and do an assessment, and they would need to determine if the magnitude of those needs was greater than they could handle within their own board budget. And if they believe that it was, then there's an opportunity for them to put that on a capital construction list, which the board submits annually to the department. And when that is in here at the department level, then a committee out of the Facilities Planning Division reviews that and looks at the needs and looks at the costs, and they do that on a provincial level, but they look at each list from each particular board, and then based on the recommendation from the board, the board may put that particular school 9 out of 10 on their list, or they may put it 1 out of 10. So once that list is here and reviewed, then consultation between the department staff here and board staff begins as to what is best for that school. Is it a renovation? Is it something that can be handled in the board's budget? Or is it, new construction? But that's the process. So something of that magnitude, if board staff identified that the needs in that school were in the 4-point-something million, that would be well beyond what the board, that's not just paint and new roof, that's a major investment.
The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the Minister. That was my thought when I saw that number. I thought that's a big number, and so I appreciate that, because I'm going to pass your comments on, and the same thing obviously applies to in terms of the Hants North or any schools. There did seem to be issues definitely at both of them. And in my last minute, I think we have a problem in terms of vocational training in the province. I'm not sure if the community colleges. I think we have a problem in terms of vocational training. I talked to people in my constituency, in particular contractors, and one of them told me 5 years ago that on any job that he's on, there's no skilled workers under the age of 40. And so I think we're either not getting enough or attracting enough, or the cost of the community college system is prohibitive. And I just wonder if the department ever looks at some component that was similar to the old vocational system, where students could go at an earlier grade level, complete their grade 12, and pick up a trade. And I wonder if that's one that the department has looked at. I thought it worked.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the member opposite. I think we all recognize that that group of skilled laborers is aging, and we have not been keeping up with our training for their replacements. And in recognition of that, the Options and Opportunities program that we have introduced in this budget is geared towards that particular population, students who cannot and should not be university bound, but they do have an aptitude and an interest and an ability to be good, skilled laborers, and they need an opportunity to get some training. And so what we're doing is looking at providing something, I think it's 27 schools this year. 27 schools this year throughout the province will have opportunities to offer courses. That doesn't mean that every school will have that, but within the family, I would expect in your particular case, there would be opportunities for students to pick up some of that skilled training, a spin-off of the old vocational training program. So we've begun that. Do we have the schools identified? Yep. And we do have the schools identified. I can share that with you. Okay.
Thanks to the Minister and the staff. Appreciate it.
Time for the member has expired. We'll now recognize the member for Halifax Clayton Park.
That's right. Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to rise today and have a few questions in this estimates time with the new Minister of Education, and congratulations on your new appointment. Just going through this, I have a number of things that I wanted to touch on today. Some of them in post-secondary and some in the other areas. I also welcome the staff today. It's nice to see again some of the staff that I've dealt with when I was the critic for education, which I am not anymore for the Liberal caucus. I wanted to talk in the first instance on public libraries. And my question for the minister is really around the new consultation that's been going on across the province on public libraries. I think it was finished up just in the last couple of weeks. And it was around, I gather, the role that they play in communities and what communities or individuals expect of libraries. But I'm very concerned about the funding as well. So I wonder if you could give me some background to that consultation and where you hope it will lead.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member opposite, our funding allocation for public libraries last year was a bit over $10 million, and at the end of the year, we were able to give them an additional $1 million as support for the good work that they do in their communities.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Well, that begs two questions. $10 million was the annual allotment for the libraries, with $1 million additional provided at the end of the year. I wonder if you could tell me if that was the same case the year before, that there's a pattern of having additional funds at the end of the year rather than built into the core funding.
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member opposite, figures that I'm seeing now, in 0405 it was 750,000 plus 350, so it was an increase in 0506 to 10 point what?
0506, 10.7, we paid 11,763.
10.7 plus the additional 1 million for 11.7, so it was an increase from 0405.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much. And I wanted to go back to my original question that was not specifically on the funding, but around the consultation that's taking place. And there were consultations in many of our communities, certainly at the Cash and Goodman Library in Clayton Park. The provincial librarian, I believe, is coordinating those consultations. And I wanted to ask specifically about the purpose and the intent of those consultations and what you're hoping to learn from them and where you hope to go with the answers. So I wanted to get more of the context around that consultation.
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member, at this point, we're prepared to provide the terms of reference for that consultation process, and that will outline the expectations. So we can provide that for you if that will help answer that question.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Yeah. Around the province, the funding for most of the public libraries are predominantly provincial funding, but here in HRM, it's pretty much the reverse. It's sort of, rather than being 30% municipal, it's 70% municipal, 30% provincial, as I understand it. So quite a different mechanism or funding formula here in HRM as opposed to the other smaller libraries that are found throughout the province. And some of the articles that I've been reading about the library funding refers to library cash woes, library making their case for more funding, and of course a lot of this is going on at the municipal level because they do not have enough funding to do the very valuable work that they're engaged in. And I would like to ask the minister through the chair if she could refer to any work that they're looking at to increase funding to our HRM libraries that are extensive. They also serve rural communities. They also rely on bookmobiles. They have extensive ESL programming and programming around workshops for people re-entering the workforce. They do a tremendously wide range of activities to help foster an educated and well-informed, literate community. And I wonder if you could talk about any progress in improving the funding for HRM libraries.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member, I've been advised that there was a study that was completed, and it was a costly venture to bring the level of funding for libraries up to the recommendation from that report. We are beginning that, but we have not been able to achieve the level that report was recommending.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much. And again, on the subject of our local libraries, I wonder if the minister could give a time frame or any kind of plan about moving towards the recommendations of that library committee report. And as I understand it, that funding report came from all the library systems across Nova Scotia, that they worked collaboratively to come up with a process or a funding program that they felt would be reasonable. So is there now a proper response from the department that would say over what period of time you'd expect to get there?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the member. What I would be looking for would be the results of the consultation process that you referenced, and then use the results of that to help us sit down and look at developing a plan for continued support and increased support. But I would want the consultation results first, please.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure that the departmental staff will make that available to you, but I just wanted to stress the point that it's extremely important here in HRM, as it is across the province, that those libraries receive adequate funding, because they're performing so many very important community-oriented tasks. And again, I point to literacy. I myself, some years ago, was a tutor for literacy. They have a lot of volunteers that come into the library and perform that. And in my riding of Halifax Clayton Park, the work they do in ESL is also very, very important. They supplement the work that is available through other programs, and these are all volunteer-driven and free programs to the community. And again, you know, we can't stress enough how important that is. And basic literacy is a real problem here in this province, and our libraries are probably the key to get there. So I would really urge the minister to have a look at the funding for public libraries as soon as possible. And while we're talking about libraries, I'd like to move to school libraries. Through you, Chair, I'd like to just ask the minister about programs to strengthen school libraries. There's been a lot said about them not receiving funds directly for books and to improve resources. So I wonder if you could outline any initiatives that are currently underway that would see a strengthening of school libraries. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member opposite, I did indicate in my introductory remarks that we had increased funding to school libraries, that it is targeted, and that we would be asking boards to use that increased funding to provide library technicians to be available in their libraries. With respect to the books and allocation of resources to the libraries, the boards are able and encouraged to use their textbook allocation, if there's money available in that, to buy resources for their library, whether that's hardcover books or software.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much. And would the minister be able to give us some sort of dollar figure or among to correlate to school libraries to the targeted funding that you refer to, because that is something that is an improvement if you're actually targeting it to the libraries. However, I'd like to get some sort of indication of the size of that allocation.
The Honourable Minister of Health, Minister of Education. I'm stuck on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the member, our allocation to libraries is about $560,000, $570,000 per year, and that can go towards resources, supplies, materials that are needed. As I said, the software or the hard text.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
I wonder, through you, Mr. Chair, if the minister could clarify whether any staffing is included in that, because in her first response she indicated that there would be targeted funding to increase library technicians in the schools. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chair, to the member, the targeted money was to provide staff, the library technicians, and those numbers I gave you, 570 and 560, those are cumulative, so we're looking at a total of 1.13.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
There. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. That actually clarifies. I thought you were talking about a range rather than two separate numbers. So that actually makes it a little bit more significant, because as we know, when you take an amount of money that's designed to purchase books and spread it across so many schools, the impact is really negligible, and that's unfortunate. But we've seen that in the building of new schools. For example, a new school was opened in my area just in 2000, where only $10,000 was allocated to outfit a library in a primary to grade 9 school that included French immersion. So it just shows how inadequate often our funding is to get a library up and running and to keep it properly stocked with books. So what I'd like to stress here is a little bit about planning for the future of our school libraries. And there's been a lot said over the years about them being diminished. Certainly in the HRSB, in the Halifax Regional School Board, we've had a lot of libraries in the past that were staffed with teacher librarians, and the library was an area where students relied heavily on the librarians for resource and assistance in writing papers and studying and research. That has changed over the last few years, and in fact, just in the last year, the association or organization of teacher librarians was disbanded because there were so few left in the Halifax Regional School Board. I understand now that there is a different category, and that we're looking more at these the library supports, and I had the correct name here actually. They don't call themselves technicians. Library support specialists was the term that I was given, and I'm wondering if in introducing more library support specialists, we wouldn't be able to provide more staffing in our school libraries, because many of them are not staffed or not staffed the full day, and these library support specialists may be going to different locations. So are there any statistics or any background that the minister could give me on that? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chair, to the member opposite, with respect to the planning for school libraries, we do recognize, in fact, when we do new school construction projects now, the library is very often the focal point of the school, and so we're not diminishing in any way the importance of libraries. With respect to the staffing for those libraries, we recognize that we are moving away from the traditional librarian and looking to the library technologists or technicians, and those people are readily available and participate in training programs at the community college, so we do have a good supply, and it's important that we have that supply available. It may not be so with the librarians as to what the supply of trained librarians would be to fill those positions.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While we're on the theme of literacy, libraries, and reading, I wanted to raise an issue with the minister today concerning a newspaper, and I can table a copy of it or leave it for the minister, but it's called the East Coast Reader. And the subtitle is A Plain Language Newspaper. And it's actually a publication that was done by a group in Nova Scotia, but it had funding from the Department of Education, and perhaps the former Minister of Education will recognize it. I think that there's been some communication with the Department of Education around continuing the grant that might be available, or perhaps making up some federal grants that were lost. I think it's a combination of funding. But this newspaper hasn't been published since November 1st last year, 2005. And it was tremendously valuable to the groups that are studying literacy and learning to read. And in fact, each of the articles is sort of graded by what level of literacy you need in order to read the article. And it's very, very helpful. And I think other members of the legislature may be interested as well in seeing that. But it's a great loss when resources like this are no longer available, especially when we've pioneered and done the work required to I guess even to envision a project like this and bring it forward over a period of years. And then to lose that resource, is a great loss to the, not ESL, but to the literacy programs that are operating across our province. And so I'm wondering if the minister was familiar with the East Coast Reader, or if the deputy minister is, perhaps he could brief her a little bit and we could have a comment on providing this kind of grants to support literacy at the grassroots level. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the member opposite. We are going to look into the availability of funding as in the form of a grant. If that was the funding source before, then we'll look at the availability of that to continue that production.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Well, thank you very much. I will say I think it'd be a tremendously well-spent investment if we did provide that, and I appreciate the minister's willingness to look into it for us. I wanted to ask a few questions around English as a second language. Again, this is a major issue in the Clayton Park area. It's a very important aspect of our schools, and without the provision of ESL programs and education, we wouldn't be able to service so many of the students who do come into the doors. Last year, in talking to the principal at Halifax West High School, I was told they have 80 students who were exclusively in ESL studies and not able yet to integrate into the classroom and join the other classes because their English had not reached a level that was proficient enough. And 80 students in a single school is very significant, and they don't really have the resources to do all that is necessary for those students. The classes are large, there's less one-on-one because there are so many. And actually every school in the Clayton Park riding has got one of the YMCA newcomer staff members in there working in the elementary, junior high, and in the high school. And that helps as well in terms of the integration. But ESL is a huge issue, a challenge. And I would like to ask the amount of money being spent this year on ESL. If you could, I'd like you to break down Department of Education. Perhaps you'll be including in that Department of Immigration or Office of Immigration funds. If you could break the two down for me, that would be helpful. And just give me a background on your view. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the member. We recognize that ESL is an important program and that the need is greatest in Halifax area, and I think our funding reflects that. We have, in 05-06, there was a total of $350,000 that went towards that, and $302,000 of that went to the Halifax Board. So I think that's a clear indication that we recognize that the greatest need is there and the greatest amount of funding has to follow. In 06-07, we added an additional $200,000 to that. Out of our Department of Education budget, $100,000 of that came from our department, and the $250 plus the $200 new money came from immigration.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much. I think it's important for the minister to recognize as well that the supplementary funding, which is a major source of funding for HR, at least Halifax and Dartmouth schools, let's put it that way, not all HRM schools, but Halifax and Dartmouth schools, has been picking up the slack on ESL for many years. And in fact, when there was no funding whatsoever targeted to ESL from the Department of Education, it was supplementary funding, which is paid for by the property owners of Halifax and Dartmouth, that was really used to provide this very essential service. And as the minister will be aware, with the provincial initiative to encourage immigration, we have to start putting more resources in there so that we can balance those two initiatives. That you can't be on the one hand encouraging immigration and urging people to come here and then not providing this most basic service to the young people and the families that are there. So it's very important, I think, that we look at greater funding. At the same time, I'm sure the minister is aware that supplementary funding is always at risk in Halifax, and having been a former councillor, and there are other former HRM councillors in this room on all sides of the House, and I think that we recognize that it's an annual exercise in angst to go through the debate on supplementary funding and try and protect those very necessary programs. And as is often said at City Council and around that table, the problem is that the Department of Education and the government of Nova Scotia is not picking up their responsibilities. And that is why the provision of supplementary funding becomes so heated and so important. And the ESL is a perfect example of one of those programs that, were I around the table at City Council, I would be fighting vehemently for the retention of supplementary funding, because it's so important that we not drop programs like ESL. And so I'm wondering if the minister has plans to increase the funding again for ESL, because the supplementary funding is still being required to supplement what you are providing. Although I will give the government some credit for finally putting money towards ESL, which was not being done before. So it is a positive step that you're now providing some ESL funding. I recognize that. But when will we get to the point where there's sufficient ESL funding so that we can support our immigration initiatives and provide the right level of support?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the member opposite. Just want to make a point clear that the funding that we are giving for ESL is on top of the per student funding that goes to all boards anyway. So we recognize that it's an additional support, and it is added on to that funding. We also recognize that up until last year, it was supplementary funding through the municipality that did the bulk of that. We recognize that, and thus the infusion of dollars in the last 2 years, and it is our intent to continue to make that contribution to support that program.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. I wanted to go to the subject of the pre-primary pilot project that's ongoing right now, and I think was begun just last year, so it's had only, in some boards, less than a full year to be tried out. A number of boards didn't get it up and running until the new year, so it began in January rather than last fall. My question to the minister around the pre-primary pilot is what you're doing to look at targeting the area of greatest need. In speaking to this when it was first introduced, I was very clear that starting education earlier and having a program for 4-year-olds is a good idea, but the way it's structured now as a first-come, first-served program in every board means that I don't believe the children who need it the most are the ones that are getting access to this program, because it's the parents who are most informed, the ones that are most connected in the community who know about it and line up and get their children into these programs. And it also requires parents who are able to transport their children to and from the school. So in many boards where you're in a more rural setting, it's impossible to have, you have to have transportation in order to do that. So I'm questioning the value of the pre-primary program if we are not trying to target it to those of greatest need. So I wonder if you could speak to that new pilot project, please.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the member. We are piloting the pre-primary program. We have that in place in 19 sites during this past year, and we will be moving into the second year of that pilot in the same 19 sites. Recognizing that it is a pilot, we will be doing monitoring and assessment of the whole program, and part of that assessment will include the readiness state of these students when they move into primary. It will also include the availability of such a program if it's deemed to be valuable for all students, and also the transportation issues. So all of those concerns will be part of the review process, but for the upcoming year, it will be the second year in all of those 19 sites. And as I said, we will be monitoring the progress of these students and their readiness level when they're registered in primary this year.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I think what I'm hearing is it's going to be status quo until we finish the second year, and then we'll have a look at it. But I do think there's some very plain shortcomings that are already visible, and it might be prudent for the department to look at those now and begin to think about ways to address it, because there's no point in waiting the second year to just confirm what you know, that you're getting the best students already at the 4-year-old age, because they're the ones that are coming from the homes with the greatest advantages. And I think that's important to note. Sometimes you don't have to wait 2 full years to see that in its entirety. I'd also like to ask the Minister, through you, Mr. Chair, about any analysis of a new start date for school. And the Deputy Minister will be aware that we had a private member's bill in the previous session of government asking that the start date for school be moved from a birth date of October 1st as the very latest to December 31st, which is more in sync with the other provinces in Canada. And it first came to light because of pressures in the Greenwood area and actually here in Halifax with a lot of the military families who are moved around the country, and moving into Nova Scotia found that to be, they felt that was regressive, that their children, had they stayed in other provinces, would already have begun school. And they asked that this be reviewed. And I think that there's a lot of merit in looking at standardization with other provinces so that we're not out of sync. And I think that December 31st is perfectly reasonable. So I'd like to ask the Minister if she's willing or has already begun to review that start date.
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the member opposite. We did have that question earlier, and the commitment that we made was that we recognize that we are out of sync with the other provinces. We do recognize that transfer for students into our province does not present them with any difficulty, that we accept them at whatever age if they've started earlier in another province. But we have undertaken and made a commitment to review that and to look at the impact that that would have on our system, on our facilities, and on our budget.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to just share with the Minister that I've had many emails around that one private member's bill. I've introduced quite a number of private member's bills here in the last 2 or 3 years, and that one did generate a lot of emails from parents, a lot of talk among parents themselves, asking me when it might come into play and how important it was to them. So I would like you to know there's a lot of support for that new idea. It's not a new idea, really. It's been around forever, and it'd be wonderful if this minister would be the one to tackle it. But anyway, we'd love to see some movement on that. I wanted to ask as well, could you tell me how much time we have left on my questioning?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. I wanted to ask about the introduction of guidance teachers at an earlier age. And during the election, we'd raised the issue about guidance teachers in elementary school, and that's something that has been adopted in Newfoundland to great success. They're finding it's addressing some of the problems with children at a much earlier age and helping to intervene earlier, which of course will divert problems later on. So could you tell me if you're looking at that, please?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the member. I think we all recognize, those of us in education, that a lot of concerns and issues with respect to student behavior and student need for counseling begins at a very early age. It's not limited to junior, senior high school. And so as a result of that, we have, for the first time, committed $500,000, which is to be used for guidance support in our schools at the grades 3 through 6 level. So hopefully we can do what you have identified, and which is rightly so an issue, and that's being able to have intervention and provide supports for students at an early age. and hopefully that will translate into more success for those students as they move through junior, senior high.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
I realize there's very little time left. I'd like to ask the minister about the plan to deal with students who are suspended and what's being planned in terms of creating a special program for those students who are on suspension. And I think particularly here in Halifax, in the urban area, there's a lot of opportunity to create a program where students could be diverted into a separate area and do something constructive during that time. So could you elaborate on your plans?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Chairman, to the member opposite, we have identified that we need to provide learning opportunities for students during suspension, whether that's in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension, but we do have a responsibility and an obligation to provide that support and that service to them. And so what we're planning to do, and we've looked at setting up a tracking system where we can monitor at a provincial level the suspensions that come through the schools, looking at patterns of behavior, repeat suspensions, and so on. And so once we have that information, we'll be better able to develop programs that will respond to that. But at the current time, many boards do have their own suspension programs. They have teachers who work with students who are suspended, and boards are responding to that population now on an individual board basis, but we'll be looking at something provincially.
Order, please. The time allotted for debate on the estimates in committee on supply today has expired. The Chair will now recognize the Government House Leader.
You don't need us tomorrow?
Excuse me?
I'm in your way.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that the committee now rise and report considerable progress.
Clerk reports.
The committee has made progress and begs leave to sit again.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to call the order of business private members' public bills for second reading.
Private members' public bills for second reading.
And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call Bill number 27, the Fisheries and Coastal Resources Act.
Bill number 27. The Honourable Member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to address the bill, the Fisheries and Coastal Resource Act, Bill number 27. The issue: the Nova Scotia Fisheries and Loan Board does not provide adequate access to capital, especially considering the high prices associated with an enterprise starting up for licenses, gear, boat, etc. The cost of a license can be estimated at $800,000 to $1 million. Currently, the Nova Scotia Fisheries and Agriculture Loan Board are not available to fishers, associations of fishers, or companies for the purchase of building a fishing vessel, the purchasing of or installing engines, equipment, or electronics, or technical modifications. Mr. Speaker, your government's position, the Nova Scotia government maintains that they cannot loan funds for the purchase of license due to the fact that licenses remain the property of the federal government and cannot be used as security. However, a court case heard in the Nova Scotia Supreme Court in January 2006 has given credence to the issue of licenses conferring as a bundle of a right for a commercial value, in fact, constitute property. The court case was recognized by the Royal Bank of Canada versus Saunier in 2006 in the Nova Scotia Supreme Court. The Royal Bank of Canada seeked a clarification from this court, finding that a fishing license granted by the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans is, in the hands of a holder, a form of a personal property which can be charged under the General Security Agreement made pursuant to the Personal Property Security Act of 1995. And further, they seek a finding that such a license is also a form of property from the purpose of Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, or the AIB, which a receiver or trustee can require a bankrupt to transfer. The application submitted that such a license is personal property, despite the reality that the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans has the ultimate control over the granting of the transferability of this license. This decision, the evidence confirms my understanding that on the east coast of Canada's fishing licenses, particularly for lobsters, are commonly exchanged between fishermen for a great deal of money. Fishing vessels of questionable value are traded for small fortunes because of their licenses and are anticipated to come with them. To accept the argument of the respondent that there can be no property in these licenses in the hands of the holder because of administrative control would, I conclude, foster an unreasonable legal condition based on a historical definition of property that ignore what is actually happens in the commercial world that the law must serve. It is important that the law address and reflect the obvious, that although these licenses do not give excessive control to the holder, they do in fact provide a bundle of rights which constitute marketable property capable of providing security. There are lending institutes apparently prepared to accept the holder's interest in these licenses as intangible personal property and potential as a security. The minister may not agree to the strategy for realizing such security upon default. However, there is a risk that the lender accepts. Formally, I find that the interest of the holder in a fishing license issued by the Department of Fisheries and Ocean is intangible personal property which can be charged under the security of agreement made by the pursuant to the PPSA. And Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to refer to some notes that I spoke on this particular topic a number of years ago. And if I could just bring your attention to this date. It was at a Lobster Advisory Committee workshop for District 34 in October 1st and 2nd, 2002, regarding Nova Scotia Fisheries Loan Board. I'd like to read excerpts of that particular speech. The lobster industry has changed over the last years, or the past 20 years, or the past years. The 200-mile limit, a limited fisheries, a moratorium, quotas, core licensing, and the Donald Marsden decision, and more. Even Revenue Canada has changed and now looks at licenses and quotas as an asset. Just check your tax return on that one, and they will then try to purchase a license today. In 1997, the range from $50,000 to $175,000 for individual licenses. Now, 5 years later, lobster licenses that go between $800,000 and $1 million. It's hardly pocket change anymore, Mr. Speaker. But for all these changes, the one thing that has remained the same is the Fisheries Loan Board. Their policy has not changed since 1978, which means next year their policy will be a quarter of a century old. The one thing that must change hasn't. The issue with the Nova Scotia Fisheries Loan Board has laid dormant for years, Mr. Speaker. And while some consideration from time to time has been given to this particular issue, nothing has been done. Enough is enough. It is time to move on this issue, and we are desperately past due for such changes. While some of us may not agree or want to admit it, the average age of a lobster license holder is in the mid-50s, which means some are getting ready to retire. Many of us can see the transition starting now, and because of this,